Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm your host, Ali, the manager at Enlighteens Education. After the College Board made an announcement, it will no longer offer SAT subject tests to U.S. students and will discontinue the optional SAT essay after the slated June 2021 test date. Furthermore, UC will not consider SAT or ACT test scores for admissions decisions or scholarships for fall 2022 applicants. Is it still necessary to prepare for SAT or ACT tests? Why UC hates SAT or ACT so much, though many private universities still keep them? Let's welcome our senior consultant Daniel to provide us with an in-depth analysis of should you take SAT or ACT in 2021. So before we start the webinar, please let me introduce a little bit about Enlighteens and what we do. We are a group of educators who have many years of experience in college admissions consulting and working with families in the Bay Area and beyond. Enlighteens Education offers personalized college planning services and strengths-based mentoring approach to identify each student's characters, interests, strengths, opportunities, and discover a unique education path to realize their long-term goals. This includes guiding families through the confusing college applications process, course selection, extracurricular activities, summer planning, and test prep. Our offices in Cupertino and Pleasanton are home to our full-time consultants and support staffs with an average of 8 years of experience. Our years of teamwork also let us offer stability and a high level of synergy. There are two parts of tonight's webinar. First part is Daniel's presentation. The second part is Q&A. Please feel free to type your questions over the chat button on the bottom of your screen. I will collect them and they will be answered in the order that we received. All right, now let me give the stage to Daniel and get started.
All right, thanks, Ali. All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for taking some time to join us tonight. So before we get started, I'll go ahead and introduce myself for anyone who is unfamiliar with my background. I did attend school in the kind of like the South Bay area in California. My family moved to America when I was 4. So I kind of grew up in the West San Jose area. I went to Dilworth and then I went to Miller and then went to Lynbrook High School. So I'll just go ahead and leave this screen on the page if you want to take a look at kind of, some of the things that I did throughout high school, some of my, accomplishments, achievements, and awards. But that's not really the focus of tonight's topic. And you'll also see this and feel this theme as I continue to talk about tonight's topic is, yes, we want to plan, but we also want to be very flexible with our plans, right? For example, we were planning to take SAT and then this, UC news comes out. We were planning to apply to only UC schools, and maybe you've heard from this last admission cycle, maybe like a lot of friends or family of friends and things like that. We hear a lot of stories, oh, this person didn't get into UC, whatever, and we really thought that he or she would, right? And why or why not? So we do want to be very flexible with our strategy, our approach, and we just want to be able to adapt to the kind of ever-changing environment of this climate as well. The idea here is I didn't really have a plan throughout high school, but the best thing that was consistent for me was personally, I made sure to keep an open mind and I made sure to just try new things and kind of go outside of my comfort zones. If you ask me 8th grade or maybe even just the beginning of 9th grade, what do you want to do through high school? What do you want to study in college? I had really, really no idea. I didn't have anyone, kind of guiding me. And if I had known what I know now, right, today as a consultant, I would definitely give my younger self different advice. I didn't take advantage of the school counselors that were provided. It was a lot of just, I hear my friends are doing this. Should I do that? I'll just go ahead and say yes. Taking certain classes just because my friends are doing certain things, activities, just because my friends were. But at the same time, I wanted to, just follow my interests. That sounds like fun. Sure. Why not? I'll try it. So the thing that was consistent for me, again, personally, was this ability to keep an open mind and try new things. And that just kind of led to this natural organic growth throughout high school. And that's why, by senior year, I was doing a lot of different things compared to freshman year, of course. After that, I really enjoyed teaching. And so I decided to pursue my master's in teaching. So now I'm also an instructor at the end of college. So I do have a lot of background teaching English as a second language, preparing students for high school and college level research and writing. So I also, dive into high school essays for school, and then also college essays, applications, so personal statements, how to tell your personal story, but not just tell the story, but also wants you to make sure your reader understands your story, can feel, your personality and the things that you went through as a person in your story. That's really, really important. We don't want to forget that writing is also a form of communication, right? If you just kind of list everything, like things that you did, that's really no different from an activities list or a resume. So making sure to add your personal voice into your personal statement so you can captivate your audience. That's really, really important. So like Ali mentioned earlier today, yes, today's agenda, we're going to start with weekly news update. Then we'll talk a little bit about trying to understand why the UC doesn't enjoy using the SAT, ACT anymore. But why is it that most private colleges still continue to use standardized testing, so SAT and ACT test, of course? And then, so what kind of students should take ACT and SAT based on this climate then? I'll share with you some examples of students and their kind of successes this year. I have some students who took the test. I have some students who didn't take the test, the SAT, I mean, right, or ACT. And they both have successes and they both have failures. And I'll explain to you, some of the things that we saw and what they have in common in terms of success. And then number 5 is what's the best time to take the test if we still plan to take the test? And of course, we'll end with our Q&A as usual. All right, so weekly news. So this past couple weeks, we heard a lot of stories of students getting their admissions and, mostly rejection letters or waitlist letters, especially from the UCs, the UC system. If the UCs say that they're doing something and they said that they're doing something multiple times already, we really, really have to believe them, right? They're not lying. So if they say that they really want to focus on diversity, yes, they're going to focus on diversity, right? So they're going to probably focus on more of the underrepresented minority groups. So we have to believe that's what they're going to do. So this is the thing. Maybe you saw this news article this past week. There was a student with a 4.3 GPA with 8 APs and honors. And of all the UCs that she applied to, she was accepted UC Merced only, right? This is not one of our students. This is from this news article. And based on this article, the idea is that, majors matter. Majors matter. You can see here at UC Irvine, admissions officers had to review a record 108,000 applications for freshman spots, right? Their school only has like 40,000 students in total. So that means their freshman class is only like 10 to 15,000, right? So almost half of the students applied, half of the more than 100,000 students applied to just 6 of 85 majors. Science, biological sciences at the top of the list, top choice, selected by nearly 12,000 applicants. Other popular majors were business, nursing, computer science, and psychology. Okay, so if you noticed in the beginning of the presentation, I also went to UC Irvine. So this is my alma mater here. And these are the most popular majors. So for a long time, UCs, they always say holistic admissions. They say, oh, your major doesn't matter. They say, oh, we look at the profile, right? And we don't look at your, last name or your name at all, or your ethnicity, your gender, or your major, nothing like that, right? We look at your profile overall, make sure you're a good fit for our campus first, and then we look at your major, and then we decide. So even if that's true, right? That first impression of the student, sure, maybe the major doesn't matter. But when it comes to, if they say yes or no, majors absolutely matter, right? Because it's only common sense. They can't accept all the students they like if they all chose bio, for example, right? They just can't admit that many biology majors. So majors absolutely matter, right? So this is something we hear colleges say, but what does it really mean? And how do we interpret that? And then how do we use that in terms of our own planning, our own strategy? Okay, so yes, majors absolutely matter. We can see that was huge this year. A different student said none of her friends were accepted to UC Irvine, but she was. Right, so it was exciting for her, but also surprising to her. She had a 4.2 GPA. She also had 8 APs in honor classes, but she felt underqualified compared to her friends who were waitlisted or denied. But here's the main thing, right? Here's the kicker. Chloe's friends intend to major in science and psychology, 2 of the most popular majors, while she applied as undeclared and expects to major in a humanities field. This this news article doesn't give us all the information, right? But we can expect that probably maybe the classes that she took throughout high school, maybe her extracurriculars, maybe her interests just more naturally aligned with humanities. So even though she's going in undeclared, she probably mentioned, her interests in humanities. So when the admissions officers look at this and they look at her profile, again, holistically, yes, then great. She is a good match for humanities. It's a much less competitive major. She probably has a higher chance of getting in there. And that's exactly what happened, right? She got in. All right, another point here. So according to UC Irvine probably couldn't accommodate more than 10% of the bio applicants, right? Makes sense. Less popular majors would probably have a higher admission rate, he said, right? This is the person in charge of undergraduate admissions. However, students shouldn't try to game the system by applying to less selective majors because, and here's the key point, because they might not be able to change them under the strict rules for doing so. You've probably heard this strategy before, right? If you really, really want to get into a certain school, maybe don't pick the most popular major, right? Maybe pick something else. Especially a much less common major. I remember, whenever we visit the UC, the counselor sessions and meetings, right, just for the counselors, they always joke like, hey, we have only like a handful of students who study German as their major, right? So can you give us more German students, basically, right? Students who want to study German as their major. So I'm not saying like you should pick German and then, hope you can get into UC Irvine. But you want to make sure, again, your profile, they do look at you holistically. So if they see that your profile is mostly like computer science or something, right, and then you chose like German as your major, that's probably not really going to work. They probably see exactly what you're trying to do, but you do want to try to pick, right, a major that is still somewhat related or mostly related to what you've done throughout high school, but yeah, maybe just less selective then. But you notice Dale Lehman did not say they cannot change their major. It's they might not be able to. So this is something you really have to keep in mind and consider as one of your strategies. I'll just summarize. In general, there are two questions, right? Is it the school that you really want, or is it the major that you really want? If it's a major you want and you think you can't really get into these schools with that major, then of course you have to pick different schools with that major. So maybe less competitive schools or, a little less popular schools, something like that. But if it's the school that you want, then sure, right? Think about choosing a less competitive major, a less impacted major. At UC Santa Barbara, which received a record 105 and then 640, so almost 108 as well, right, applications, faculty told admissions officers they wanted active, engaged learners who involved themselves in their school and community. This is huge. Even during the pandemic, did they seek out opportunities to learn through TED Talks? Did they volunteer for online tutoring or help family members stricken with COVID-19? So here's the thing. It's not really about what you do. This is what I've noticed, from all my time working with applications. It's not really about what you do. It's more about why and how. I'm not trying to speak for them, but imagine you're an admissions officer, right? Just because a student helped a family member who had COVID versus a student who didn't help a family member, who did or didn't have COVID, that doesn't really matter. That's not really the point. It's not really about what they did. It's what does that person, what traits, what personality trait, what characteristic, right? What can you sense about that person because that action happened? If they helped others, then they are, right? They are obviously helpful, they're kind, they're social, they're, mature enough to do that, they're whatever, okay? So you really have to think about what are the qualities that you're trying to present. And that's what you're trying to extract from your profile. Like what did you do? So if you, I'm just gonna give an example, like if somebody played a musical instrument for 4 years, what personality traits or characteristics can we draw, right, from that? If it's something like music, maybe there are competitions. So if it's competitions, then it's practice, it's diligence, right? It's perseverance, maybe there were some failed competitions and, something. But okay, so sure, there's that. But we also just want to watch out because what about school? Like grades, what do grades already say? Isn't that already diligence? Isn't that already perseverance? So you have to just kind of watch out, right? Are you really as well-rounded in terms of characteristics as you thought you were, right? Because maybe your extracurriculars, they don't they don't say that much more about you. Maybe your grades, maybe your classes already say those things about you. So in that case, right, it maybe is redundant. So you really want to think about what other things outside of a classroom, outside of a traditional student, right? Because that's what they're looking for. They're active, engaged learners. It doesn't say you have to have, perfect A's. You just are an active, engaged learner, someone who's really involved with community, with school. So also the social aspect, right? Because college is, after all, it's a microcosm. It's a small society on campus. And they want to make sure that everyone's going to be able to fit into this little, society on campus. So make sure you have social skills as well. UC admissions directors stressed that they evaluated students in the context of their own schools and communities, and this is something we've known for a long time as well. The idea that if your school offers a bunch of challenging classes like APs and honors and you don't take any at all, that's going to hurt you. If your school offers only like 3 APs and you take all 3 APs, that's great. Okay, so the schools, all the colleges, they're comparing you to your school, to your region, right? To your peers, basically. So yes, you're kind of like competing with your classmates, your schoolmates, right? Essentially. So a student who took all 6 AP classes offered at her school might be more impressive than the one who took 6 at a school, but that school offered 12, right? Offered twice as many. So they might be thinking, well, why didn't you challenge yourself? And of course, in the industry, right, this is known as academic rigor. So making sure you're challenging yourself as well. I know students, especially when they're picking their their 12th grade classes, they're always thinking like, oh, it's 12th grade, right? I want to relax. I don't want to take anything too crazy. I want to take as few classes as possible, just 5. I don't want to take APs or honors if I can try not to. And they say, oh, it's just too hard, too much work. But I always remind students, right, just because you're going to college doesn't mean it's going to be a huge difference in terms of difficulty or whatever, because in high school, you have 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. College, right, freshman year of college, it's just 13th grade. There's only one difference, right, 1 year difference. It's the same difference between when you go from 11th grade to 12th grade and then 12th grade to freshman year. I know it feels like a big difference, right, because there's a big difference in your lifestyle and all that. But in terms of the difficulty of the class, academics, it's really not that much of a jump, right? It wouldn't be. It's not supposed to be that much of a jump. So if you're not taking AP classes or even college level classes throughout your 11th and 12th grade, then maybe the colleges don't know and they're not confident that you're going to be ready, for 13th grade, basically, for college. Okay, so that's the idea. So make sure you have this academic rigor as well. So I just want to remind us that you can see at the bottom right here, we do have a blog, the enlighteens.com/blog, and the blog will have much more information about weekly topics. And this is actually one of the things, discussed this week. So go ahead and make sure to visit that blog and look for more updates and details. And you can keep up with the news and our analysis of the weekly news. Okay, so another student accepted to UCLA and Berkeley with a 4.1 GPA, but that ranks 25th percentile, right? So not necessarily elite GPA for those schools. Daughter of Salvadoran working class immigrants, first in her family of 7 to attend college, took 6 AP classes, 11 community college courses, helped family with cooking, cleaning, and other chores, pushed herself to overcome her fear of speaking by joining the decathlon team, winning awards for her speeches and interviews. She also showed off her math and engineering and teamwork skills, right, social, in school club activities and leadership position in her international dance group. All right, so yeah, GPA is not everything. GPA is not everything, but if it's not, you have to have other things, right? Again, we have to take what the UC say. They say holistic admissions, right? We have to believe them. Yes, your GPA matters, but it's not the thing that will make or break. I have a lot of parents usually asking me like, oh, what is the minimum GPA to get into Berkeley? There's no minimum. There's a minimum to apply to UCs, but it's not like if you have a 4.0, you can never get into Berkeley. Okay, so there's no minimum GPA, just like there's no maximum GPA for getting into these schools. We do have to just think bigger picture. How many students do they have, right? Just statistically, how many students do they have? What kind of students are they, accepting? What percent of those incoming freshmen are what kind of students? If you are in that little category, then you're competing with those people in that way. So I guess what I mean is, if you're trying to go for like the highest grades, then you better have the highest grades, right? The highest of highest grades, because you're using that as your way to kind of differentiate yourself from the other applicants. Right? So if you're using GPA to get in, then your GPA has to be like basically at the top, right? And your classes have to be, very challenging and lots of courses. Or you could be more well-rounded. You can have, decently high grades, right? Mostly straight A's here, basically. But also you're doing a lot of things outside of class. And this really comes down to what kind of student, are you? What do you want to do? What do you want to do throughout high school? What do you want to do throughout college? What do you want to do after college? These are really, really important questions to think about, to challenge our teenagers to think about, because that's going to give them a big picture and set their more long-term goals. And usually I notice they'll be a little bit more motivated, to focus on the short term. Think about traditional, especially like high school education is, we tell our students exactly what to expect, right? There's a rubric, as a teacher, there's a rubric that we give our students. There's a model, there's an example that we set for our students. And usually what it comes down to is a lot of students are just unfamiliar with what comes next, right? They don't really realize or understand the big picture. I have juniors and seniors sometimes come to me, maybe it's a little bit too late or something, right? But never too late. But then they have all these questions like, oh, I don't even know what like Common App is, or like, what do I do for the applications? What do the essays look like? I took all these classes my 9th and 10th grade. Should I have taken those classes? It's going to be harder we can't change the past, but what we can do is we can always pivot and we can talk strategy and go for what's best for each student. So of course, earlier is better, but you want to make sure, right, you have an idea. Okay, so topic 2. Why does the UC quote unquote hate the standardized test so much? So a couple of bullet points before we dive into this. UC has actually been placing less weight on SAT and ACT even before COVID. You can look up, past news articles before 2020. There have been long discussions about getting rid of standardized testing at UCs already. Lower SAT students still found success at UCs via GPA and extracurriculars. Okay, so let me repeat that. Lower SAT students still found success at UCs via GPA and extracurriculars. I actually have a quick example of this. I'm not going to talk about this student later, but I had a student, I think a few years ago, high GPA, right? Like 4.3 weighted, but pretty low SAT. It was like 1200 something, but he had really strong extracurriculars. And now he is doing, data science at UC Berkeley. So it's still possible. You can have a lower SAT and you can still get in. Actually, this reminds me, I had another student, international student, psychology major, right? High GPA, lower SAT again. I think it was like in the 1200s as well, maybe 1300s max. But yeah, got into Berkeley as well, right? So it's more about the GPA and EAs for UCs. So that's why they've already been kind of, leaning away from this, like the SAT score. And same thing, you've probably heard a lot of students from this year, right? High GPA and high SAT scores, but maybe waitlisted or just rejected from UCs. It's probably, right? I don't know these students, but probably came down to extracurriculars and essays. A lot of students are maybe a bit lost, especially with the remote learning, right? Like I said, a lot of students they respond well to assignments, right? Like, here's your task. You need to do this by this date. Do this, do this. We're kind of conditioned, right, to think and act that way because of class. But when we have all this free time suddenly, right, stuck at home or something, not that many students are proactive, about their own learning, about their own interests. Like, oh, I'm stuck at home. Well, I might as well spend this time to, play with my 3D printer, or play with like coding, make mods for Minecraft, just for fun. But I think this is a struggle for everyone, right? Like, I think everyone's kind of just trying to adapt to this distance learning and work from home and things like that too. But that's what separates, the kind of higher, more attractive, applicants. But anyway, COVID was basically a perfect timing, right, for getting rid of the SAT, ACT from the UC's eyes, at least. And don't forget, this is something I mention all the time. It's a public school system. They get their money from the public government, the state government. So they have to follow certain procedures, right, or certain things. For example, my experience in the community college, the California Community Colleges, the CCC system, there's that new bill that passed. It's like AB 405 or something like that. It basically puts a lot of stress on transfer students. It puts a lot of stress on classes that have to you have to graduate or you have to transfer students out of your college within like 2 or 3 years. I think it's within 2 because I'm just speaking from an ESL background. Usually classes, at community colleges, some students take more time to learn English as a second language, especially if they come from another country already in their 20s, 30s, or even 40s. So now there's a lot more pressure, and the ESL department, the ESL program has been shortened immensely, right? And now there are like financial pressures and all this stuff. So, we're probably familiar with this idea that just basically public schools have less control over these things compared to, say, like a private school. So public schools, if they, maybe the order comes down from higher up, like, oh yeah, you have to focus more on diversity, right? If you get rid of SAT, like, there's not much they can do about it, right? So the thing that we really took away from this year is applying to only UCs is going to be extremely risky. If you apply to only public schools, going to be really, really risky. There's a big trend now is to focus more on applying to private schools. If finances are an issue or like a concern, don't forget that private schools actually have a lot more money to give away. So you could actually end up saving even more money by applying to private schools, depending on your family financial situation. Right? This is actually something I wish I had done more when I was a teenager, because like we had some financial issues too, but I didn't even think about applying to private schools because I always thought like, oh, they're more expensive, right? No way I can afford them or something like that. So just the idea here is reconsider a school list. Okay, so why? Why do UCs hate this standardized testing? Critics of the test cite decades of data indicating that they're inherently biased in favor of affluent, so wealthier, white, and Asian American students. Because the idea is that it's too easily gamed by students who can pay thousands of dollars for private coaching and test prep. So some of the regents among the UCs, right, they even use the word racist to describe the exam. The chancellor of the UC Berkeley has long called for a move away from standardized testing for admissions. At the national level, researchers have found evidence that standardized test scores, such as SAT and ACT, are worse predictors of a student's success in college than other measures, such as GPA. Right, so this is one of the main reasons that the UCs have decided to get rid of standardized testing. At less selective four-year public colleges, a student with a high GPA and a middling or average SAT score has a 62% chance of graduating within 6 years. The opposite, high SAT score but average grades, has only a 51% of graduation rates, right? So they're using this statistic, this number, to support the idea that they want higher GPA students compared to higher SAT score students. So in short, SAT scores are not a precise indicator of student aptitude, skill, talent, because the average student who retakes the SAT receives a score boost of more than 100 points. More than 100 points, right? And obviously, this is very true. When we tutor, when I work with students, when they take their first test, it might be something as low as like 1,200. I teach them more grammar, punctuation, reading skills, up to 1,400, 1,500 even. The main thing is that the SAT or ACT, the test format, is not taught in school. So it just comes down to how much time do you have to practice for this test. If someone doesn't have that luxury in their life, right, to spend this extra time to focus on a standardized test, then it's going to be a negative for them, right? So yes, definitely, punctuation is a huge thing. Punctuation rules are not really taught at the level that they need to be taught to do well on the SAT and ACT. Okay, so why do private colleges keep the test then? So again, reminder, UCs, lower SAT students still found success at UCs via GPA and EAs, right, extracurriculars. So it's almost like the opposite. At private schools, lower GPA students still found success via high test scores and extracurriculars. All right, so I don't want to get too deep into this, but one of the main things is the difference between public and private. Remember I said earlier, privates have a little bit more control over their finances, more freedom, more liberty in terms of like how they spend their money. So i.e., accepting students. So in that case, they can take a little bit more risk. And you've probably heard as well, UCs, they kind of focus on numbers, right? That's kind of like the safe way for them to go, is based on statistics, based on numbers. And so if they're getting rid of SAT, standardized testing, that was one of the numbers they can use. Well, the only number that they can use now is going to be GPA. So yeah, that means UCs, right? To get your foot in the door, it's going to be GPA. And we talked about this another week, but also because there's no more SAT subject tests, then that means the AP tests are going to be a lot more important now as well, because that's another standardized number that the public schools can use, the UCs can use. But if they continue to say that they're focusing on diversity and they're focusing on holistic admissions, then those extracurriculars and those essays are going to be really, really important as well. And I do have some nice examples of that from this year. But the other thing is, remember, for public schools, you don't have letters of recommendation. You don't send them usually, right, for UCs unless they ask for them. So in that case, those 4 short essays are going to be really important because the schools won't have anything written by, like your teacher or your counselor that they can kind of see to get a better picture of who you are as a student. Privates can, right? Privates have not only letters of recommendation, but also interview opportunities. So they can have a much better, 3D visual of who you are as a person, like literally and metaphorically. But yeah, that means they can take more of a risk with your numbers. So for COVID related, SAT and ACT are an important factor due to 2 semesters of pass no pass. Because if we took away GPA as one of those numbers that we can look at, right now, SAT and ACT is the only other number that all students have, or most students have, when they apply to private schools. So for private schools, this is a different approach, basically, right? So holistic admissions plus contextual information. Every time you go to a college tour, or anytime you talk to a college admissions office, they say, tell us, right? We need to know, give us context. If you don't tell us, we won't know. And this is something I remind students all the time when they apply for anything. When you apply for college, when you apply for summer programs, right? When you apply for anything at all, you need to give them context. So one of the biggest examples I can give you right now is that activities list. If there's something that you love to do and you spend hundreds of hours doing it and you don't report it in your college application, colleges won't know, and they'll think that you didn't do anything at all, right? You didn't do anything meaningful. Maybe you just watched TV for hundreds and hundreds of hours. Quick example is I had a student, he spent a lot of time in Minecraft, playing, Minecraft online, but he wasn't just playing the game. He was acting as a moderator, as part of the admin team. He was improving the server. He was helping, players. He was basically, customer service in a way. And he talked about that, and that was great. That showcased his social abilities and his kind of desires to help others, at the same time utilizing his tech skills and background, to help improve the game from within as well. So context is huge. Okay, SAT and ACT are a relatively low-cost way for disadvantaged students to demonstrate their preparedness for college, at least when compared to joining the crew team or taking bassoon lessons. All right, so the idea here is it's cheaper than some other hobbies and interests, at least. UC Faculty Review Committee echoes, right? They actually agree with this. They say that the tests help system schools identify talented students from low-income or minority backgrounds. So that means this report also contradicts existing research, claiming that SAT scores are a better predictor of student success than high school GPA. Right? But somewhere along the way, more research surfaced, and now the UCs are, I don't want to say for sure, but maybe it's one of the main reasons they're just using that to finally get rid of SAT and ACT. And that's a whole different topic. I don't want to get too political about that. There are a lot of deep dive topics there. But let's focus on why private schools keep the test. For any given high school GPA, a student admitted with a low test score is between 2 and 5 times more likely to drop out after 1 year. 2 and 5 times more likely to drop out after 1 year with a low SAT score. Up to 3 times less likely to complete their degree compared to a student with a high score. But then, right, the counter here is if grades become the metric by which applicants are judged, so if UCs put so much more weight on GPA, high schools will have an incentive to hand out A's like Halloween candy. Right? High schools will just continue to give out high grades, grade inflation, and it can make their school look pretty good if they're sending their students to high-ranked universities, right, and colleges. The flip side is also true. It can also make classes at competitive high schools a lot more difficult. I have students come from the Fremont Union High School District, right? Like maybe Monte Vista, Lynbrook, Homestead, Cupertino. They're talking about their teachers who are not willing to give out more than like 10 A's in the class, right? You really have to earn and fight your classmates because your teacher will only give out 10 A's and then the rest will be B's and C's. So we have to start thinking, well, I mean, that's a different topic as well, right? Think about, is that fair? Is that fair to, divide your grades like that? But that also brings the question to, if each school is different, if each teacher is different, right, then the grades, the GPA, is it really that consistent? Is it really that dependable? So then isn't the good idea to have something that's standardized anyway, right? So that, again, comes back to supporting the idea of a standardized test, like an SAT or ACT. But at least from the UC's perspective, they think that the APs might be enough for that. So SAT scores can still be useful as a check against grade inflation then, right? Because just because you got a 4.5 GPA at a certain high school, maybe the A's were easier to get. Maybe the teachers, the classes, something, was easier. So it's kind of like that, big fish in a small pond, small fish, big pond, or, however you want to visualize this. But it still comes down to your high school. Okay. I actually had a student ask me, he was a student at Monte Vista High School in Cupertino, and his mother was asking me like, oh, should we transfer, right? Should we go to this other school instead, a private school? They called us, they asked us to, they told us a lot about it, and they told us that they can get us into this certain university, a nearby university. They can take courses there. And the more research that I did for them, and I was looking into it, it's like, there's no actual guarantee. And also, you're just taking courses at the college, which you could do from any high school, right? You can sign up for concurrent enrollment. You can dual enrollment. You can take classes at other colleges, community colleges, whenever you want, right? That's actually what a pre-college program is. So it's not really that, a big of a deal. And then I also reminded them, hey, you go to Monte Vista High School, right? Look at the ranking. Look at your average GPA, average test score. Even if you're not at the top of your high school, just because you come from the high school, colleges will already, they know your high school. They understand your high school. They know that an average score at your high school might be the same as a, above average or very, very high score from a different high school. Okay. So yeah, you're still being compared to your school, your classmates. So yeah, that's basically, why private colleges still keep test scores, because it helps to check against GPA inflation, and it just helps to standardize things more here. So then who should take the test in 2021? If you kind of piece things together based on what I've said so far, right, it's more about strategic planning. And you definitely want to apply to more private schools amidst this plummeting admit rates all around us. Even though the private schools are also plummeting in terms of their admit rates, just because, they're dropping their admit rates doesn't mean you shouldn't focus on them, because we're seeing dropping admit rates at all schools. So if you take that standard, that thing in common away, then yeah, there's no difference, right? All schools are dropping. So at the end of the day, you still want to keep focusing on private schools a little bit more than UCs if possible, right? Especially at UCs. However, I do want to remind us of the importance of EAs combined with SAT and ACT. So I'm going to talk about 4 of my students, seniors this year, with their results, and I'm going to share with you kind of what my takeaways were, right? So here's a student that I helped get into UC Merced for a CS major, first of all, right? CS major with a 3.0 weighted GPA and a 1250 SAT. Now, I know a lot of people are thinking like, oh, it's just Merced, but I really don't think it's just Merced, right? We can't say that about any of the UCs anymore. You can see that Merced is a very new school. I believe opened campus 2005, right? And they're already ranking, right? Like top 100 something. So if we follow this trend, they're going to be, rising very quickly. And UC is still UC. It's still UC. So it still has certain standards, right? So UC Merced, UC Riverside, right? Especially UC Santa Cruz, we can see it's getting a lot more popular, a lot more competitive. The average the average GPA at Santa Cruz is already above 4.0 GPA, right? So this is not UC Merced, UC Riverside, UC Santa Cruz of, 15, 20 years ago. This is very, very different now, right? So getting into UC Merced, UC Riverside is already very nice. But anyway, 3.0 weighted GPA, 1250 SAT, still got into UC Merced for a CS major. Now he did get into higher nationally ranked schools. He got into some, I think, like top 30, top 40 liberal arts colleges. But in the end, he wanted to stay with the UC system, public school system, and so he's going for CS major at UC Merced. So that was great. The main part here, right? You're thinking, well, those numbers, right? You might be a little taken aback by numbers, but his stories, right? His stories of maturity and diligence, and he really told his story in those 4 short essays, and I felt they were really, really meaningful and powerful, impactful. I mean, right, for the reader. Now I have another student. Let's see, also CS major, going to Santa Clara University this year. Again, 3.0 weighted GPA, not making this up, coincidence, 3.0 weighted GPA, 1230 SAT, and guess what? She even took Java at De Anza and got a C. She got a C in Java, and she still got into Santa Clara University CS major with these numbers. Why? Because of her extracurricular activities, okay? She and one of her friends, they had this idea. They had this idea of creating more like a virtual reality textbook, like education, this class. And she wanted to, because she was inspired by her history class, right? She was reading her history textbook and it's like, it's so boring, right? It's very hard to visualize what's going on. You have to have very, very powerful, visual imagination to pretend that you're there, right? So that you can feel like you're there. So inspired by her, history textbooks, she and her friend decided to, well, what if we can, make readers or students feel like they're there? So they worked on this VR application. So she had to teach herself a lot of CS stuff. She had to learn how to use Unreal Engine. And then they went forward with it, and they were just looking for companies that might be interested. And they, went to these presentations to try to, sell their, not literally sell, but more like promote, right? What they had created. And some companies took notice. And they got invited to speak in Britain, in London, at some expos, two expos. And then after they came back to Santa Clara, I believe they tried twice for this competition. I think the second year was much better. They were a finalist. And then they also filed for a trademark. They launched a company name and everything. And at first I was thinking, when I met her, she came to me as a senior already. I actually asked her, like, oh, it sounds like you're doing a lot of business stuff, right? Do you want to actually study business? Because a lot of things what you were doing here, talking to the U.S. Patent Office, right? Like, this is kind of more maybe businessy kind of stuff. But she still wanted to do CS. And then she also had this internship, or just shadowing. She shadowed at Cisco, I believe, some like router, networking stuff. And so she learned how to do some stuff. But yeah, it was mostly her dedication to this vision that she had, and the fact that she too was very, very scared of talking in public and talking at those expos, right, in front of all these companies, potential buyers and partners. But anyway, to finish my story, when she came back to Santa Clara, actually one of the school districts got in contact. They were kind of interested in that, right? So they're looking. I believe last time I talked to her, they're still in the process of looking for like angel investors, funding. Okay, University of Rochester. So 3.7 weighted GPA, also a high school in Bay Area, South Bay Area, digital media major. No SAT score, right? Did not have an SAT score at all to report. 3.7 weighted GPA. University of Rochester was the highest ranked school at 34. Same thing, it was more about the extracurriculars. So really, really focused on doing what she wanted to do, her interest, and going deeper, going further with it. Right? Don't just talk about it. Don't just say you have interest in it. Actually start doing it. This is the student that I recommended to her. Like, hey, if you really want to do digital stuff, maybe it's time to build a computer. Even though you're not really familiar or comfortable with building a computer, go for it. Right? Why not? Take the risk. Take the chance. Invest in yourself. And at least you'll have a cool, story to write about, to tell about it. And she did. That was actually one of her UC essays, is how she got into hardware, right? She learned this hardware so that she can use better software to better realize her, digital design, animation, 3D animation, rigging, right? These kind of dreams that she had. So she had this art background that eventually, again, organically evolved into this digital media. So that's one of the phrases that's really important, right? Organic development, organic evolvement, organic evolution of your profile. I had some students, they asked me like, oh, can I just switch to something that's not CS? So the first 3 years CS, but the last year like maybe not CS anymore. It's like no, don't do that, right? Because it's not really going to be a natural transition. It doesn't really make sense for the colleges. Okay, and then this last student here got into USC and also Duke Kunshan. So 3.9 weighted GPA, 34 ACT. So not over 4, right? 34 ACT, that's pretty strong. And then got into USC for ethics and leadership with tracks in philosophy, religious studies, and public policy major. As you can predict, she's very well read, right? Very, very good with her words. So naturally, her writing was already very powerful, right? She had strong writing skills. And so the best thing that I recommend to her, helped her figure out, was more like the structure, the organization of what she wanted to talk about and how to talk about it, and what kind of examples to demonstrate, her, not just her proficiency, but also her true interests or true passions in this kind of topic. But yeah, those are all great results for these students. So you can see the theme here is the importance of EAs. And then so the question is, who should take SAT and ACT in 2021? If it fits your strategy, if it fits your plan. If it doesn't, it could be okay. It could be okay, right? For example, my University of Rochester student. It really depends on what kind of student. Like I can't give a yes or no answer to everyone because everyone's different. All the students are different. What are you already spending your time on? Are you spending your time on anything, or extracurriculars, grades, or whatever? Are grades your strength? If not, then do your best, but your strengths may be somewhere else, right? So maybe focus on your strengths, and that's what's going to get you into college anyway, because that's what's going to get you into the workplace. That's what's going to get you through life, is your strengths, right? Not everyone is going to be 4.3, 4.4, 4.5 GPA, right? Not everyone is going to be able to reach that level. So the idea here is, if you realize that that's not your strength, then okay, that's really okay. Just have a high GPA, maybe even 3.8, 3.9, 4, sure, right? Weighted GPA. And then, or even, okay, it kind of depends on your school, right? Again, I can't say yes or no or whatever. I don't have a one size fits all answer here. You can see, some lower GPAs can still get into school. Some lower SATs can still get into school. Sometimes both can still get into these schools. So I guess what I mean is just time. It's time. How do you want to spend your time? And what's the best way to spend your time? For some students, it's going to be grades, your GPA. For some students, it's going to be extracurriculars. Maybe you have a natural talent in non-grades, right? Non-academic stuff, then great, right? Keep going with that. But if you still do plan on taking the SAT and ACT, right? Maybe it fits into your plan and you realize, yes, like I should take it. When is the best time? Well, first of all, I'm going to start with the idea of measure twice, cut once. Okay, measure twice, cut once. You have to practice. You really, really have to practice. Make sure that your practice is consistent. Make sure that you know what you're doing. Like I said earlier, when it comes to the English, make sure the grammar, punctuation rules, perfectly, because especially on ACT, right, I would say like probably half of those questions are related to sentence, like the grammar of the sentence or syntax. So be prepared by practicing now. I actually showed ACT to some like 7th graders and 8th graders to do the English and the reading sections. And they said like, what? Like, this is it? I don't believe it. Like, this is what you take to get into college? It's actually not that hard, right? Especially the English and the reading, the grammar and the reading. The math and the science sections. So the math might be a little more difficult if, obviously you haven't taken like pre-calc or calc or trig. But at least the English, you can start pretty early. So for English, focus on grammar, punctuation, timed readings. Again, these are just things that are not really practiced in school. So if you can spend some time to practice on them, then that's great. Aim for fall 2021 and utilize the summertime. That's my advice at this point, right? If we're already here now at this point and your question is, should I take it or when should I take it? I'm going to say you're probably, I don't know you, probably not ready, right? If your question is, when should I take it? Probably not ready. So in that case, just aim for fall 2021. That's okay. Plus, on the flip side, maybe we're gonna be able to see more test locations and testing open up and stuff like that. So don't stress, don't worry. But definitely aim for fall 2021 then probably, and then utilize the summertime. use the summertime to measure twice, cut once, right? Really focus on your weaknesses. And just like practice, when you practice sports, imagine basketball. If shooting is your weakness, then just practice shooting, right? You don't have to play a whole game every single day. Just practice shooting for a little while. So same thing for these tests. If math is your weakness, yeah, just take the math section, multiple times. Maybe the grammar is your weakness, right? Maybe reading. You don't have to do the whole, like 4 hours, like every day, every week. But it would be actually the best way to practice that, because if you don't practice the full length version, you don't have that mental stamina, right? Like you have to keep going and don't give up, and making sure your brain is ready for like a long-term race, a long distance race. I mean, like that. So there's a different feeling to it. Make sure your attention span, attention to detail, you can keep it up for 4 hours. Maybe you need to experiment with chewing gum, eating candy, drinking some caffeine, coffee or tea. But if you're nervous about COVID, right? Like, oh, I want to take the test, but I just, I don't want to travel, or I don't think that's feasible, or, I'm not sure about this pandemic. That's actually exactly what happened to one of my students. No SAT score to report. And that worked out well, because it wasn't, she wasn't just sitting around because she wasn't, practicing for SAT. And actually we did practice for SAT and ACT for a long time. And, unfortunately, because of health concerns, right, she wasn't able to take it. But that didn't mean we lost that time, right? Like, it still helped her for her classes, her regular classes, because English, math, these are transferable skills back to school anyway. So her writing improved, right? Her grammar, her vocab, all that improved anyway for school. But at the end of the day, right, like, she wasn't just, oh, I'm not taking the test, I'll just sit around and do nothing now, right, instead of practicing. Well, no, she used that time to continue focusing on her extracurriculars. And if you are going to apply to more private schools, as your school list evolves, then you also want to make sure you identify your teachers who will write your letters of recommendation. So make sure to spend some time getting to know your teachers and your school counselor as well. That's huge. How many examples have you heard? Even this year, students with high GPA, 4.3, 4.4, high SAT scores, 1500, high 1500s, 1560, 70, didn't get into, certain schools. And I, if I didn't work with that student, the first thing I'm going to think about is maybe the essays and the letters of recommendation. Because I would say that if you have a high GPA, like really high GPA and really high test score, I don't see the reason to not get in, unless it was really your major was probably the wrong major, like it didn't fit your profile. But let's just say you did pick the right major that matched your profile. I don't really see, right? If you had a really high SAT score or a really high GPA, why not? So I think it usually comes down to the essay and the letter of recommendation. The letter of recommendation is huge, because this is something that I can't help students with, right? I can't control what the students, teachers have to say. But if you can find teachers that allow you to write your own letters of recommendation, right, and then they just kind of like sign it at the end, those are great, right? We can use that to one of our advantages. Okay, so when's the best time to take it? In short, fall 2021, and utilize the now until that time to really make sure that you're ready. You got it down, and plus, if you're ready, then you can kind of cut back on practice, and you can do some other things during the summer as well. So speaking of summer, yeah, we do have a boot camp coming up. I'll be teaching the English sections, I believe. But if not, then it'll be one of our highly qualified teachers as well. But we have SAT and ACT boot camp coming up. We did the same thing in winter, and most of our students, we saw immediate increases. Like I said, especially if your students didn't really study grammar or punctuation at school, you can ask them, when's the last time your teacher talked about gerunds and comma splices, right? And the 4 types of sentences and clauses. These are all really important things, right? Like, what's the difference between a colon and a semicolon when connecting sentences? Dashes and hyphens. These are all punctuation marks that will show up on the ACT, especially SAT, rhetoric questions. How do we combine these questions? The transition words, the more that students practice the types of questions, because they see like what kind of questions are being asked, they usually have a better idea of predicting what the correct answer should be, of course. And this also, right, corroborates the article, the statistic we saw earlier, is that students who take the test multiple times, they should see their score increase by 100 or so. But that article didn't say how much time passed between tests. So something like this, or a boot camp like this, if we were taking a test every week, I would expect to see, at least from the first test to the last test, right? I usually see at least 100 to 200 as well, right? But I'm not going to guarantee that because it comes down to the student as well, right? Some students, when they get to the end of this boot camp, they're just like, they're not even trying anymore or something like that. Maybe their effort has changed, but we'll do our best. That's going to be down to the student. But I do see that there are grammar related questions, right? They usually get those more and more correct as we talk more about commas and punctuation like that too. All right, so yes, that will be the end of today's topic, and I'll go ahead and open it up for Q&A.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing, Daniel. And thank you for all of you for attending our webinar. And that's all for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. And if you have any further questions or interested in any of our services or sign up for the SAT or ACT bootcamp, please feel free to contact us over email, phone calls, or even scan my WeChat code on the screen to join our educational WeChat group and receive our weekly webinar updates. Hope to see you all again, same time next Saturday. Thank you. Good night.